The sky was heavy with the promise of rain, the streets slick and cold beneath the weight of impending storms. The city, always busy, always moving, seemed indifferent to the life that lay in the dark corner of an abandoned alley. There, nestled against the cracked concrete, a small, bloodied figure lay motionless, its tiny body struggling to cling to life. A German shepherd puppy, no more than a year old, had been discarded like trash, left in a pool of crimson. His body was battered, bruised, and soaked in his own blood, his once clear eyes glazed with pain. He wasn't moving. He could barely breathe, each shallow gasp a reminder of his fragile existence. He had been beaten, attacked, left to die alone. And yet, amidst the brutality of it all, there was something in those eyes, something that clung to life, something that was still fighting. The sound of a footstep echoed in the alley, soft, deliberate. The woman who stepped forward didn't know what she would find, didn't know how broken the world could be. But as her eyes met the lifeless gaze of the puppy, something snapped in her chest. She kneeled beside him, the chill of the rain seeping through her clothes, but she didn't feel it. Her hand reached out to the fragile creature, her voice trembling as she whispered, "I'm here, baby. You're not alone anymore." It was in that moment, staring into the eyes of a creature who had known nothing but pain, she made a promise. This life would not be wasted. She would fight for him. She would not let him die alone in the dark. The rain had started falling in soft, steady droplets, casting a sheen over the city streets that made everything look slightly unreal, as if the world was cloaked in a veil of melancholy. The woman's boots clicked rhythmically on the wet pavement as she walked through the dimly lit alleyway, her coat pulled tightly against the chill of the evening air. She didn't know why she had chosen this path tonight. Perhaps it was instinct, or perhaps it was the quiet pull of the alley that had always seemed to beckon her on her nightly walks. But tonight, there was something different about the alley. Something in the air, something that tugged at her heart in a way she couldn't yet explain. The city, with its constant hum of traffic and distant voices, felt distant in this alley. The sounds of life faded away, and in its place, there was only the wet drip of water falling from the walls of nearby buildings, the faint rustle of trash caught in the breeze, and a deep, unsettling silence. As she walked deeper into the narrow, shadowed corridor, she began to feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. It was as though the alley had absorbed all the sorrow and despair of the city, and now it was waiting for her to notice. Then she saw it, a small, bloodied figure, barely visible in the shadows, half hidden behind a pile of discarded boxes. It took a moment for her to fully comprehend what she was seeing. At first she thought it was a piece of trash, maybe a rat or something discarded in the alley. But as she stepped closer, her heart stopped. A puppy. A small German shepherd puppy, no older than a year, lay motionless in a pool of blood. His body was twisted in a way that made her stomach turn. His fur, once thick and soft, was matted with dark, drying blood. There were bruises on his tiny body, gashes and cuts that had been carelessly inflicted, and his legs were bent at odd angles. The violence of the situation hit her like a wave. Whoever had done this didn't just hurt him. They had left him to die, abandoned him as though he were nothing more than trash. Her mind raced. What kind of person could do this? The puppy was so small, so fragile. His eyes were open but glazed over, distant, as though he were already slipping into unconsciousness. His breathing was shallow, the rise and fall of his chest barely perceptible. It was clear that he had been left for dead. She didn't even think. Instinctively, she kneeled beside him, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch him. His fur was damp, sticky with blood. She whispered softly to him, her voice shaking with a mixture of disbelief and horror. "It's okay, baby. I'm here. You're not alone." The puppy didn't respond, didn't even move. His body was cold to the touch, and his eyes were slowly losing the fight to stay open. Every muscle in her body screamed at her to act, to help him, to do something, anything. But she didn't know what to do. There was so much blood, so many injuries. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing in on her, suffocating her. But then, as if summoned by the sound of her voice, the puppy's head turned slightly toward her. His eyes flickered just for a moment, and she saw something in them. A faint spark of life. A faint recognition. He was still there. He was still fighting. She didn't hesitate. Her heart pounding, she scooped the puppy up in her arms, cradling him against her chest. His small body trembled in her arms, and she could feel his fragile heartbeat against her. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she tried to stay calm. tried to steady herself, even though everything inside of her was screaming in panic. She knew she had to get him to help, quickly. The longer he lay there in the blood-stained alley, the less chance he had of surviving. But even as she began to move toward the street, her mind was consumed with the horror of what had just happened. How could someone do this to an innocent animal? How could they abandon him like this, leave him to die in the cold? The question gnawed at her, but there was no time to dwell on it. Right now, all that mattered was getting him to safety. The rain had started to come down harder, but it didn't matter. She didn't even feel it as she walked quickly toward her car, her arms wrapped tightly around the pup. His small, fragile body was a stark contrast to the rain-drenched street, and she felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility for him. She couldn't leave him. She wouldn't leave him. She wouldn't leave. As she reached her car, she gently placed the puppy on the passenger seat, her hands shaking as she fastened his seatbelt. His body was still limp, and he didn't seem to notice. His eyes were closed now, his breathing shallow. She started the car, her mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. The nearest vet was a 20-minute drive away, but it might as well have been 100 miles. Every second felt like an eternity. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as she glanced over at the puppy. "Please stay with me," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of the rain. "Oh, please fight, baby. Please don't give up." The city passed by in a blur as she sped toward the vet, but all she could focus on was the small, bloodied puppy beside her, his life hanging in the balance. She didn't know what would happen when they got to the clinic, but she couldn't stop now. She wouldn't let him die alone in that alley. She would do everything in her power to save him. The vet's office was sterile and cold, its walls lined with white tiles and the harsh hum of fluorescent lights above. The scent of antiseptic hung in the air, the sterile environment doing nothing to soothe the woman's growing panic. She sat in the waiting room, her fingers digging into the arms of the chair, her mind consumed by the image of the puppy in her arms just moments earlier. The rain outside continued to beat against the clinic windows, a constant rhythmic reminder of how much time they had lost. Her eyes flicked to the door, where the vet and a nurse were preparing for the puppy's examination. She had been here before, had witnessed the helplessness of a pet owner when faced with a situation too dire to ignore. But this was different. This wasn't just a pet. It was a soul. She had promised him that he wouldn't die alone, that he would have a chance. Now she was praying for a miracle. She barely heard the nurse's footsteps as they approached, but the gentle hand on her shoulder snapped her out of her thoughts. The nurse, a woman with kind eyes, was offering her a small, sympathetic smile. "You were going to take him in for some tests," the nurse said, her voice gentle, almost too gentle. "We'll need to assess the extent of the damage to his body." The woman nodded, barely able to form words. Her throat felt tight, the weight of the puppy's life pressing down on her chest. She had always believed in hope, in the possibility of miracles, but this felt like a cruel test of her faith. How could something so beautiful, so innocent, be left to suffer in this way? "It'll be okay," the nurse reassured her hand giving a soft, reassuring squeeze before she walked away. The woman let out a shaky breath as the door to the examination room swung closed. She couldn't sit still. She couldn't wait in this sterile, lifeless space, surrounded by the faint sound of dogs barking and the buzz of a fluorescent light. She needed to do something. She needed to know that he was okay, that he wasn't still suffering, that he wasn't alone. Minutes passed like hours. The woman's mind raced with the possibilities, each darker than the last. She thought of all the terrible things that could have happened to him, all the ways his body might be broken beyond repair. The vet had said he was in critical condition, but the exact details had been left unsaid. It was the not knowing that gnawed at her, the feeling of helplessness that gripped her heart and refused to let go. Finally, the door opened and the vet stepped into the room, his face grave. The woman's heart skipped a beat as she rose from her seat, her eyes fixed on his face. She couldn't read his expression, but she felt her pulse race. The vet took a deep breath, his eyes softening slightly as he spoke. "He's stable for now," he said quietly. "We've managed to stop the bleeding, but the damage to his body is significant. He's got several broken ribs, and there's internal bleeding we'll need to monitor closely. His legs, one of them might be beyond repair." The woman felt the air leave her lungs. She couldn't speak. She couldn't process the words the vet had just said. The damage was worse than she had imagined. A part of her had hoped he was exaggerating, that the damage wouldn't be as severe as it seemed. But the reality was harsher. This puppy had been through something no living creature should have to endure. She felt the tears welling up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. The vet continued, his voice soft, trying to offer reassurance. We can't guarantee anything, but we've done all we can for now. The next 24 hours will be critical. If he makes it through the night, there's a chance for recovery, but we'll need to take it day by day. The woman's heart sank. A chance. That was all he had. A slim chance. She had no idea what she was going to do if he didn't make it. She had come this far, and to lose him now felt unbearable. But the vet was right. There was a chance, no matter how small, and she wasn't about to give up on him now. I'll stay with him, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. I don't want him to be alone. The vet nodded, understanding. We'll keep him under observation, but you're welcome to sit with him. He'll need your presence. It'll help him. With that, the vet left her to wait, and the woman found herself standing alone in the sterile hallway of the clinic, her heart heavy with uncertainty. She had made a promise to this puppy, and she wasn't going to break it. She couldn't. Not now, not after everything. She went back to the examination room, her hands trembling as she pushed open the door. There, lying on the table, the puppy looked even smaller than before. His body covered with bandages and 5 tubes. His fur, once thick and full, was now dull, and his eyes were closed, though she could see the rise and fall of his chest with each breath. He was alive, and for now, that was enough. She pulled up a chair beside him and sat down, her hand gently resting on his head. The silence in the room felt oppressive, and yet as she looked at him, there was a quiet sense of peace that settled over her. He wasn't dead yet, and that meant something. That meant there was still hope. She didn't know how long she sat there, her hand resting on his, but eventually, she felt his small body shift. His breathing had become more steady, less labored. His eyes fluttered open, and for the first time since she had found him, he looked at her. His eyes still glassy, still struggling, but there was something there, something that told her he was still fighting. He wasn't giving up, and in that moment neither would she. The long hours of the night bled into the pale gray of dawn, washing the vet clinic in a quiet, muted light. The world outside was waking up. Cars humming in the distance, birds calling softly from rooftops, but inside the clinic, time felt suspended. The woman had not moved from her chair. Her back ached, her eyes were heavy, her body stiff from sitting in the same position for too long, but she didn't care. All she cared about was the fragile rise and fall of the puppy's chest as he lay sleeping on the padded table beside her. His breathing was still shallow, each inhale a delicate whisper, but it was stronger now, more consistent. She held onto that consistency like a lifeline, afraid that if she looked away, if she closed her eyes, if she let her guard down even for a moment, something would change, and he'd slip away. The storm from the night before had passed, leaving behind the crisp, earthy scent of wet asphalt that drifted faintly through the clinic whenever the door opened. Everything outside felt clean again, washed, renewed, while inside the air still held the heavy scent of fear and antiseptic. It felt wrong, she thought, that the world could refresh itself so easily, while this tiny creature beside her was still fighting just to take one more breath. The door creaked open behind her, and the vet stepped into the room, his expression softer than before. He carried the exhaustion of the night in the slump of his shoulders, but there was something else too, something like relief. Tea made it through, the vet said quietly, not wanting to startle the fragile life on the table. The woman looked up at him, her eyes red from a night of silent tears she refused to let fall. He did? The vet nodded. He did. It's honestly more than I expected. He's a fighter. She looked back at the puppy, her hand gently brushing his head. He's more than that, she whispered. He's a miracle. The vet didn't disagree. He stepped closer, checking the bandages, adjusting the Fucky's heartbeat with calm, practiced hands. The woman watched everything, every shift in the vet's expression, every pause in his breath, trying to decipher meaning. She was no doctor, but she needed something concrete to hold on to. After a long silence, the vet straightened. He's weak, very weak, but the bleeding has stopped. His vitals are stabilizing. The next days will be slow, hard. But I think he might have a chance. The woman felt something break inside her, a shudder of overwhelming relief she hadn't dared to hope for. She nodded, blinking rapidly, trying to regain control of the emotions welling in her chest. "Can I hold him?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. The vet hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She slid her arms beneath the puppy's small, battered body and lifted him to her chest. He was so light, so fragile, like holding a memory rather than flesh and bone. His head rested against the crook of her arm, his breath warm but weak against her skin. As she cradled him, a quiet whine slipped from his throat. Soft, almost imperceptible, but full of emotion. A sound that said he felt her presence, recognized her warmth, and wasn't afraid. Her heart cracked wide open. "It's okay," she whispered, her lips pressed to the top of his head. "You're safe. I'm not leaving you." He twitched, just a small movement of his paw. But it was enough to send a wave of hope through her. She had no idea how long she stayed like that, gently rocking him back and forth as though he were a newborn she was afraid to drop. Eventually, exhaustion pulled her down into the chair again, still holding him, unwilling to let go. Hours passed. Nurses came in and out. The vet checked on them periodically. But through it all, she remained. Her arms wrapped around the broken creature she had found in an alley of darkness. Sometime in the late afternoon, when the sun had shifted and the room was bathed in a soft golden light, the puppy stirred again. This time it wasn't just a twitch. It was movement. His nose shifted. His eyelids fluttered. His ears twitched slightly. And then with a small, shaky breath, his eyes opened. They weren't fully focused, cloudy from trauma and pain, but they moved. They looked around. They searched for something familiar. And then they found her. She froze, afraid to breathe, afraid to move. His gaze, weak but present, locked with hers. Something unspoken passed between them. A fragile connection, a question and answer. "You're okay," she breathed, the words cracking in her throat. "You're okay. You're here. You're alive." The puppy's lip trembled, his breath hitching as a tiny, broken whimper escaped him. It wasn't a cry. No, it was something more profound. It was the sound of recognition. Of a soul telling another soul, "I know you. I trust you. I'm glad you came back." Tears spilled over her lashes before she could stop them. She pressed her forehead to his, letting the moment settle deep into her bones. She had never felt so much love, so much fear, so much tenderness all at once. When he closed his eyes again, it wasn't from weakness. It was from rest. Safe rest. The vet watched from the doorway, a quiet smile touching the corner of his mouth. "He's bonding with you," he said softly. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "I guess I'm bonding with him too." "Good," replied. "He'll need that. Healing is more physical than 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 physical. She looked back down at the puppy, this small survivor who had endured more pain than most creatures should. His chest moved in a steady rhythm now, each breath stronger than the last. It was slow, achingly slow, but his body was waking back to life. In the days that followed, she returned every morning and stayed until the clinic closed. She learned how to help change bandages, how to stroke him in a way that soothed his restless sleep, how to whisper to him when his breathing grew uneven, as if her voice alone could guide him back to calm, 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 back to calm. And in a way, it did, because every time he heard her voice, every time he felt her hand, the tension in his little body eased. They were healing each other, quiet moment by quiet moment. One evening, after the vet had reassured her that the infection was under control and the fractures were beginning to stabilize, she sat beside the puppy on the floor. He was lying on a soft blanket, and she sat cross-legged beside him, her back against the wall. For the first time, he lifted his head. Just an inch, just a small, trembling inch, but it was everything. She gasped, hands flying to her mouth. "You did it," she whispered. "You did it. Oh my God, baby, you did it." His ears perked faintly at the sound of her voice. His eyes, clearer now, turned toward her. And though his body was weak and stitched and bruised, there was strength in his gaze. A quiet victory, small, precious, but life-changing. She reached out, placing her hand gently on his paw. He didn't pull away. Instead, he placed the faintest pressure back, a weak, fragile squeeze. Her heart could hardly contain itself. In that moment, she knew he wasn't just surviving. He was choosing to live, for her, with her, because of her, And she made a silent promise, one she knew she would never break. "I'll walk this entire road with you," she whispered. "Every painful step, every tiny victory. I'm not going anywhere." He closed his eyes again, but not out of weakness, out of trust. And for the first time since she found him, the room felt full of hope. The world outside the vet clinic had begun to move on. The rain had cleared, the sunlight had returned, and the familiar hum of life continued as if nothing had changed. But inside the quiet recovery room, time still moved slowly, gently, almost cautiously. It matched the rhythm of the little German shepherd puppy whose life hung in the balance just days ago and who was now beginning the fragile journey of healing. The woman arrived early, long before the clinic opened, standing outside the glass door with a cup of coffee in her trembling hands. Her eyes were tired, but behind the exhaustion lay a quiet determination, a stubborn, unshakable resolve that had taken root inside her since the moment she found him in that alley. She had never considered herself a strong person. Yet here she was, ready to fight alongside a creature who had no voice, no protection, no understanding of why the world had hurt him so cruelly. The vet unlocked the door and greeted her with a tired smile. "He's doing better this morning," he said gently. "This morning," he said gently. The simple sentence made her knees weaken with relief. Inside the recovery room, the puppy lay curled on a soft blanket. His tiny body was still covered in healing wounds, the shaved patches on his fur revealing bruises that had begun to fade from deep purple to a soft yellow. His ribs were carefully wrapped, his legs stabilized in a small cast. He looked small, he looked fragile, but he also looked alive, and that alone felt like a miracle. When he heard her step inside, his ears twitched. His head lifted a few inches, still slow, still shaky, but he looked at her with recognition, with longing, with something that resembled relief. She knelt beside him, unable to hold back the tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. "Good morning, baby," she whispered, brushing her fingers through the soft fur behind his ear. He leaned into her hand, a tiny trembling movement that said everything he couldn't. "I'm still here. I'm still fighting." For a moment, all she could do was sit there, absorbing the weight of his presence. Healing wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud or sudden. It was slow, almost painfully slow. It came in whispers. The way he rested his chin on her palm, the way his eyes stayed open a little longer each day, the faint wag of his tail when she walked into the room. The first time he tried to stand, it happened without warning. The woman had been stroking his back, softly humming to him, when suddenly he placed weight on his front legs, lifting his chest off the blanket. The movement was shaky, unsteady, and lasted barely a few seconds before he collapsed again, his breath coming fast and his body trembling from the effort. But it was a step, a monumental step. "Oh my God," she whispered, covering her mouth as tears streamed down her face. "You're trying. You're really trying." The puppy looked up at her, his eyes shining with something that resembled pride. If dogs could feel such things, and maybe they could. Maybe this little survivor felt something deeper than instinct. Maybe he understood that she was his reason to keep going. The vet came in moments later and froze mid-step. His eyes widened. He stood, he asked, incredulous. She nodded, still crying. Just for a few seconds. The vet knelt, checking the puppy's legs gently. This is incredible progress. He's moving faster than expected. His pain tolerance, it's unbelievable. No, she thought silently. His will is unbelievable. That afternoon marked the beginning of a new ritual. The woman would sit beside him for hours, encouraging him with her soft voice, gently supporting his weight as he tried to push himself up. Each attempt took everything he had. His breaths would grow fast. His body would tremble violently. Sometimes he whimpered in pain, but he never stopped trying. And every time he collapsed, she was there to catch him, to cradle him, to whisper, "It's okay. We'll try again tomorrow." But healing, she discovered, was not linear. There were setbacks. 2 days after his first attempt to stand, he woke at dawn whining from the pain. He couldn't move without flinching. The infection had tried to flare again. His temperature spiked. He refused food. The woman felt her heart crack open as she held him, his small body feverish and limp in her arms. Please don't give up," she whispered, rocking him gently. "Please, you've come so far." The vet worked tirelessly to stabilize him again. Medication, fluids, careful monitoring. The woman refused to leave, sleeping curled in a blanket on the cold clinic floor, her hand resting lightly on his back throughout the night. By morning, his fever broke. He lifted his head weakly and nudged her fingers with his nose, his tail giving one faint wag. She let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in her lungs for hours. "There you are," she whispered, tears falling freely. "You scared me." He leaned into her hand. A quiet apology, a quiet promise, a quiet victory. Every day after that, he grew stronger. The bones in his legs mended slowly, the cast eventually coming off. Physical therapy began. Gentle stretches, assisted standing, small steps down the hallway. The woman was with him for every moment, kneeling on the clinic floor, guiding his movements, encouraging him, celebrating him. And he blossomed under her care. His eyes regained their brightness. His tail wagged more often. He began to eat enthusiastically, especially when she fed him. His fur grew back, silky and soft, and the bruises faded, replaced with healing skin and faint scars that would stay with him forever. Reminders of his survival. One sunny afternoon, after weeks of slow, painful progress, the vet suggested something new. "It's time he tries walking outside. Outside. Outside." The word felt like sunlight itself. The woman carried him in her arms out to the clinic garden, a small fenced patch with gentle grass and warm sunlight pouring in. When she placed him on the ground, the puppy froze, overwhelmed by the sensation of wind on his fur, earth beneath his paws, the scent of grass and freedom filling his nose. "Go on," she whispered, crouching beside him. "You can do it." He took a shaky step, then another, then a third. His legs trembled violently, but they held. The woman felt her heart racing, her breath catching in her throat. She didn't dare blink. And then something miraculous happened. He walked, not perfectly, not smoothly, but he walked, wobbly, slow, determined, across the soft grass toward her outstretched hands. "Oh my God! Oh my God!" she whispered, her voice breaking, her tears falling. "Oh, look at you. Just look at you." He reached her, collapsing into her arms, panting from the exertion. She held him tightly, burying her face in his fur. "You're amazing," she whispered. "You're the bravest soul I've ever met." He pressed his face into her chest, a gesture full of trust, love, gratitude, a language all his own. In that moment, she understood something profound. This dog wasn't just healing. He was choosing to live, choosing to trust, choosing to love again. And she realized something else. He wasn't the only one healing. This journey, this fight, this fear, this love, had begun to mend the broken parts of her too. The parts she didn't even know were hurting. The road to healing had not belonged to him alone. It belonged to both of them, together. The clinic had become a second home. She had spent so many hours there, sitting with him, speaking to him, feeding him, that it felt like the walls knew them both, knew their shared story. Every inch of the clinic, from the faint smell of antiseptic in the air to the dull hum of the fluorescent lights above, was now a place where the woman and the puppy had fought for survival. But today was different. The sun hung high in the sky, its golden warmth spilling through the windows, casting a soft glow over the clinic floor. The air smelled fresh, the world outside alive with promise. And for the first time in weeks, the woman felt something shift inside her. A quiet peace, a sense of finality, the realization that they had both come so far. What had started as a struggle for survival had transformed into something beautiful, a bond forged through adversity, a partnership built on trust. Milo, the puppy who had been left for dead in an alley, was standing in the middle of the clinic floor, his body no longer fragile, his movements no longer hesitant. He was standing tall, his paws planted firmly on the ground, his head high. His fur had grown back in soft waves, and his eyes, once clouded with pain and fear, were now bright, alert, filled with life. His scars, the faint marks of the hell he had endured, were still there, but they were no longer the defining feature of who he was. They were simply a reminder of how far he had come. The woman knelt beside him, her hand resting gently on his back. He leaned into her touch, his tail wagging ever so slightly, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had traveled together. She looked at him, her heart swelling with pride and love. "You're perfect," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You're everything I hoped for." My soft but full of trust. There was no fear there anymore, no uncertainty. He had grown into a dog full of spirit, full of life, and it was all because of her. Her patience, her love, her refusal to let him go. The vet entered the room, a clipboard in hand, but even he couldn't hide the smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I think it's safe to say he's healed," he said, his voice warm with pride. The woman glanced up at him, her heart still racing from the sheer joy of seeing Milo so strong. "I can't believe it. After everything, I thought we might lose him." The vet nodded, understanding. "He's been through hell, but it's clear that he had something inside of him that kept him fighting. That and you. You both helped each other heal." She smiled, brushing her hair back from her face, trying to keep the tears at bay. "He's the miracle, not me." "He's a miracle because of you," the vet replied softly. "You gave him a chance when no one else would." The woman's gaze returned to Milo, who was now standing proudly at her side. He was no longer the broken puppy who had been abandoned in the alley. He was a dog full of life, a dog who had been given a second chance, and he had taken that chance and turned it into something beautiful. The woman took a deep breath, standing up from the floor. Milo immediately moved to stand beside her, his body slightly trembling from the exertion of standing for so long, but his eyes never left her face. His entire being seemed to say, "I'm with you. We've come this far together." "Are you ready for the world?" she asked softly, her voice full of wonder. "Oh, because I'm ready to take it on with you." Milo wagged his tail, his eyes bright with an energy she had come to love. He was ready. They both were. The vet chuckled, watching the bond between the two of them. "He's as ready as you are." The woman nodded, taking Milo's leash in her hand. She had made the decision she wouldn't stay in the clinic any longer. Milo had healed, but so had she. The walls of the clinic had served their purpose, but it was time to leave. Time to take Milo into the world that had almost destroyed him and show him that there was still beauty to be found in it. They had both learned how to fight. Now they would live. The door to the clinic opened, and for the first time, the woman stepped out into the sunlight with Milo by her side. The world outside was bright, full of possibility, and as they walked together into the future, it felt like they were walking into a new chapter, one full of hope, full of love, full of the promise of new beginning. She looked down at him, his tail wagging with every step, his eyes shining with the excitement of a dog who had learned to trust again. He had been through the worst, but now he was ready for the best. "You're home now," she whispered, her voice filled with certainty. "You're finally home. Home." And as they walked together, side by side, she knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would be more challenges, more struggles, but they had already proven that together they could face anything. Milo, once a broken puppy abandoned in an alley, was now a dog full of life, a dog who had fought for his place in this world. And the woman, once unsure of her own strength, had found a purpose in the love she had for him. Together, they were unstoppable,